I never believed in ghost stories or urban legends, but what happened to me on that rainy night in October 2018 changed everything. I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. The clock on my dashboard read to 15 a.m. as I navigated the winding country roads, my windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. About halfway through my usual route, I noticed a figure on the side of the road. As I got closer, I could make out a young woman in a white dress, soaked to the bone and frantically waving her arms. My instincts as a healthcare worker kicked in, and I pulled over to see if she needed help. Rolling down my window, I called out, "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" The woman rushed to my car, her wet hair plastered to her pale face. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I need to get to St. Mary's Church. It's an emergency." I hesitated for a moment, remembering all the warnings about picking up strangers. But something in her desperate expression made me unlock the passenger door. "Get in," I said. "I know where the church is. It's on my way home." As she climbed into the car, I noticed she wasn't wearing any shoes. Her feet were muddy and scratched. "What's happened to you?" I asked, reaching for a blanket I kept in the back seat. She took the blanket with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "I was in an accident. My car went off the road. I need to get to the church. It's important." I nodded, putting the car in drive. "We'll be there in about 15 minutes. What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, staring straight ahead. As we drove, I tried to make conversation, but Sarah remained mostly silent, only answering in short, vague responses. I chalked it up to shock from her accident and focused on the road. The rain intensified, and visibility became poor. I slowed down, squinting to see the familiar landmarks that would guide us to St. Mary's Church. Finally, the old stone building came into view, its steeple barely visible through the sheets of rain. I pulled into the empty parking lot and turned to Sarah. "We're here. Do you want me to call someone for you? Or I could take you to the hospital to get checked out." But the passenger seat was empty. I blinked, confused. I hadn't heard the door open or close. The blanket I'd given her was neatly folded on the seat, completely dry. I looked around the parking lot, but there was no sign of Sarah anywhere. My heart racing, I got out of the car, rain immediately soaking through my scrubs. "Sarah," I called out, my voice echoing in the empty lot. No response. I ran to the church doors, thinking maybe she'd rushed inside, but they were locked. The windows were dark. There was no one around. Shaken, I returned to my car and sat there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I so tired that I'd hallucinated a passenger? As I prepared to drive away, something caught my eye. On the ground near the passenger side of my car was a single white flower, a lily. It definitely hadn't been there when I'd parked. With trembling hands, I picked up the flower and noticed something etched into the concrete beneath it. Sarah Williams, 1992 to 2013. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was looking at a small memorial plaque. My mind raced, trying to recall any news stories from a few years back. Then it hit me. There'd been a tragic accident on this very road 5 years ago. A young woman had lost control of her car in heavy rain and crashed. She had been on her way to a wedding at St. Mary's Church, but never made it. I stood there, the rain mingling with the tears on my face, as the reality of what I'd experienced sank in. I had given a ride to a ghost, fulfilling her last wish to reach the church where she was meant to be married. In the days that followed, I researched Sarah's story and visited her grave, leaving the lily I'd found. I learned that she had been a nurse, just like me, which perhaps explained why she had appeared to me that night. This experience changed my perspective on life, death, and the unexplained. I've never encountered Sarah again, but every year on the anniversary of that night, I drive the same route and leave a white lily at the spot where I first saw her. To this day, whenever I drive on rainy nights, I find myself scanning the roadsides, half expecting to see another stranded soul. But more than that, I've learned to appreciate the fragility of life and the importance of kindness to strangers. After all, you never know when a simple act of compassion is help a lost soul find peace. It was a stormy night in September 2015 when my life took an unexpected turn. I was a 28-year-old software engineer, driving back to Seattle after visiting my parents in Portland. The rain had been relentless 4 hours, and I was grateful for the company of my golden retriever, Max, snoozing in the back seat. Around 11 p.m., I encountered a roadblock on I-5. A state trooper informed me that a mudslide had closed the highway, and I'd need to take a detour through the rural backroads. He handed me a map with a highlighted route and assured me it would only add an hour to my journey. I followed the detour, the rain drumming on my car roof as I navigated unfamiliar, winding roads. The darkness seemed to press in on all sides, broken only by my headlights and the occasional flash of lightning. After about 30 minutes, I realized I hadn't seen another car since leaving the highway. Suddenly, my GPS started glitching. The screen flickered and went dark, leaving me reliant on the paper map. I squinted at the road signs, trying to match them to the route. That's when I noticed my cell phone had no signal. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I was completely cut off from the outside world, driving through an unknown area in the middle of a storm. Max sensed my anxiety and whined softly from the back. Just as I was considering turning back, my headlights illuminated a figure on the roadside. It was a man, drenched and waving frantically. Against my better judgment, I slowed down. The man rushed to my window, his face etched with desperation. "Please, you've got to help me," he shouted over the rain. "My wife... she's in labor. Our car broke down a mile back. We need to get to a hospital." I hesitated, every safety warning I'd ever heard screaming in my head. But the genuine panic in the man's eyes made my decision for me. "Get in," I said, unlocking the doors. The man climbed into the passenger seat, thanking me profusely. "I'm Tom," he said, his clothes dripping onto the seat. "My wife, Jenny, she's waiting in our car. Can we pick her up?" I nodded, making a U-turn. As we drove, Tom directed me down an even smaller road. The trees pressed close on both sides, their branches scraping against the car. Max growled low in his throat, unusual for my normally friendly dog. "It's just up ahead," Tom said, pointing. But as my headlights swept the area, I saw no sign of a broken-down vehicle. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I slowed the car, prepared to turn around, when Tom's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. "Keep driving," he said, his voice suddenly cold and threatening. In the glow of the dashboard, I saw a glint of metal in his other hand, a knife. My heart raced as I realized the terrible situation I was in. I kept driving, my mind frantically searching for a way out. That's when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror, approaching fast. Tom saw them too. "Pull over," he demanded, pressing the knife against my side. In that split second, I made a decision. Instead of pulling over, I slammed on the brakes and swerved hard to the right. The sudden movement caught Tom off guard. As he lurched forward, I threw open my door and tumbled out onto the wet road, yelling for Max to follow. I heard Tom cursing as he struggled with his seatbelt. The approaching car screeched to a halt beside us, and to my immense relief, I saw the familiar lights of a police cruiser. What followed was a blur of activity. The police officers apprehended Tom, who turned out to be a wanted criminal involved in a string of carjackings and assaults. They had been tracking him through the area, which explained the fortuitous timing of their arrival. As I sat in the back of the police car, wrapped in a shock blanket with Max pressed against my side. The full weight of what had almost happened hit me. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if the police hadn't shown up when they did, who knows what would have become of me. In the days that followed, I learned more about Tom and his crimes. He had been preying on Good Samaritans, using the same story about a pregnant wife to lure them into remote areas. I was lucky to have escaped. This experience changed me profoundly. While I don't regret trying to help someone I thought was in need, I became much more cautious about putting myself in vulnerable situations. I invested in a high-quality emergency kit for my car, including a satellite phone for areas without cell service. I also took self-defense classes, determined never to feel that helpless again. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. That an easy feeling I had when I first saw Tom. It was my subconscious picking up on subtle signs of danger. Now, I listen to that inner voice, even if it means sometimes appearing rude or overcautious. Years have passed since that rainy night, but the memory remains vivid. Whenever I drive at night, especially in unfamiliar areas, I'm reminded of how quickly a normal situation can turn dangerous. It's a sobering reminder to stay alert, be prepared, and always trust your gut. After all, your instincts might just save your life. It was a late October evening in 2017 when I embarked on what should have been a routine drive through the Cascade Mountains. As a wildlife photographer, I was used to traveling to remote locations, often in less than ideal conditions. This time, I was heading back to Seattle, but spending a week photographing elk in the eastern part of Washington state. The rain had been steady all day, but as night fell, it intensified. My wiper struggled to keep up with the downpour as I navigated the winding mountain roads. The weather report had mentioned the possibility of mudslides, so I was extra cautious, especially given the late hour and my fatigue from a long day of hiking. Around 10 p.m., I approached the entrance of the Mount Baker Tunnel. At nearly 2.5 miles long, it was one of the longest tunnels in the state. As I entered, the rain noise suddenly cut off, replaced by the echo of my tires on the concrete. The yellow lights lining the tunnel ceiling cast an eerie glow, creating a strobe-like effect as I drove. Halfway through the tunnel, I noticed something odd. The car behind me, which had been following at a reasonable distance, suddenly sped up, its headlights filling my rearview mirror. Before I could react, it rammed into my back bumper. My heart raced as I accelerated, trying to put distance between us. But the car behind me matched my speed, staying uncomfortably close. I couldn't see the driver through the glare of the headlights, but their aggressive behavior was terrifying. Just as I was about to reach for my phone to call 911, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Up ahead, partially blocking the right lane, was a car with its hazard lights on. A person was standing next to it, waving their arms frantically. In that split second, I had to make a decision. Should I stop to help, risking whatever threat was behind me? Or should I keep driving, potentially leaving someone in danger? My instinct screamed at me to keep going, but my conscience wouldn't let me abandon someone who might need help. I slowed down, pulling up alongside the stopped car. As I rolled down my window, the person, a woman in her 30s, rushed over. "Please, you have to help us," she cried. "Our car broke down, and my husband's having chest pains. We need to get to a hospital." I glanced in my rearview mirror. The aggressive car had slowed down and was now idling about 50 feet behind us. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't just leave them. "Okay," I said. "Getting quickly. We'll go to the nearest emergency room." The woman nodded gratefully and opened the back door. As she did, I caught a glimpse of movement from the supposedly broken down car. A man emerged from the driver's side, but he didn't look sick or distressed. In fact, he was running towards my car with alarming speed. Panic surged through me, as I realized I'd fallen into a trap. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the woman's fingers just grazing my car as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man jump into the car that had been following me. Both vehicles began to pursue me, gaining ground quickly. The tunnel seemed endless as I pushed my car to its limits. The echoing sounds of engines and screeching tires filled the air. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. My only hope was to make it out of the tunnel and find help. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. As I burst out into the rainy night, I immediately started flashing my lights and honking my horn, hoping to attract attention. To my immense relief, I saw the flashing lights of a state trooper parked on the shoulder and just beyond the tunnel exit. I screeched to a halt next to the police car, my pursuers wisely deciding to speed past rather than stop. The trooper, startled by my sudden appearance, quickly understood the situation as I gasped out my story. He immediately called for backup and took off after the two vehicles, leaving me to give my statement to another officer who arrived shortly after. In the days that followed, I learned the full extent of what I'd narrowly escaped. The couple and their accomplice were part of a gang that had been terrorizing drivers on remote mountain roads. Their modus operandi was to force cars to stop in isolated areas, then rob and sometimes harm their victims. The tunnel had been their latest hunting ground, using the confined space to their advantage. Thanks to my report and the quick action of the state troopers, the gang was apprehended a few days later. The relief I felt upon hearing this news was immense, but it didn't erase the trauma of that night. This experience changed me in profound ways. I became much more cautious about driving alone, especially at night or in isolated areas. I invested in dashcams for my car and always make sure someone knows my route and expected arrival time when I travel. But perhaps the most significant change was in how I view the balance between caution and compassion. While I still believe in helping others, I've learned that there are safer ways to do so. Now, if I encounter a stranded motorist, I call the authorities rather than stopping directly. It's a small change that could make a big difference in staying safe. That rainy night in the tunnel taught me a valuable lesson about trusting my instincts and the importance of situational awareness. While I hope never to experience anything like that again, I know I'm better prepared to handle dangerous situations should they arise. And whenever I drive through a tunnel now, I can't help but feel a sense of relief when I see the light at the end.
If you enjoy this content and want to see more, please subscribe and turn on notifications to support the channel.